Recording. Okay. Welcome to the Dr. Anita Show. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm proud of myself for remembering to hit the record button right at the top of the hour. And Maria's giving me a virtual pat on the back. Thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate that. My assistant extraordinaire, as you know. She's there. Thank you for giving me the love. Today, we're going to talk about one surefire way to make sure you stay unhappy. Now, of course, this is a backhanded way of talking about different ways to be happier, but negativity, negative headlines, and provocative headlines like that actually grab better attention. So that's why I worded it the way I did. And by the way, that could be an indication as to some of the things that are keeping you unhappy. If you find yourself drawn to negative sorts of headlines and ideas and that sort of thing, and that you find yourself immersing yourself in those concepts, especially online, we're going to talk about all of that. So I'd like to welcome you all here. Thank you so much. My name is Anita Marcazzani. I am a licensed psychologist. I work now as an executive coach. I work with business owners, leaders, professionals, and just regular old people, helping them move forward and upward in their careers and in their lives, reducing overwhelm, reducing stress, definitely increasing happiness. In fact, several years ago, I ran a webinar series on authentic happiness, and I took the participants through a series of exercises every week. It was a pretty heavy duty sort of a webinar where people had to do a lot of stuff, a lot of homework, kind of like a boot camp style, in between each of the classes to improve and increase their happiness. And wow, it was so powerful. I've actually only done it one time, and I probably should do it again. So maybe Maria, can you remind me to do that? We should. It's probably time to. It's been only like 5 or 6 years, so let's make sure we resurrect that one, because that was pretty important. So I want to thank you all for joining me today, and we are going to talk about the one thing that everyone, I think, does that actually is a surefire path to unhappiness. And I'll talk about that. I'll give you that specific secret, what that is. And when you hear it, you're going to say, oh, yeah, I know, I do that. And I'll tell you about that in a couple minutes. But before we do that, let's just kind of provide some context and set the stage. And by the way, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I want to know that I'm coming across clearly. And if you have any questions, I want to know what they are so I can give you what you need. I am a mom. I have 2 boys, ages 21 and almost 17. And maybe many of you who are watching, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching this on a recording, perhaps you are a parent, maybe even a mom specifically. And you might know the heartache you feel when you see your child struggling in a particular area. Maybe they had their heart broken by their first boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe they're struggling in school and they can't find their way. Or maybe, they're having some drama with their friends and they just are really, really, really having a tough time. And you might have had the experience of when you're trying to boost your child up, because isn't that, as parents, what we try to do all the time when our kids are hurting? We want to turn that around. We want to boost them up and make them so that they're not hurting. And so one of the things that you might say to your child in the course of a conversation trying to boost them up is you'll probably give them the old line of, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to make the choices and do the things in your life that are going to make you happy. How often have we told our children that or thought that to ourselves about our children, or maybe even our own lives? We just want our kids to be happy, don't we? But I wonder if you've ever taken the next step beyond saying that to yourself to think, well, what does that mean? What do I really mean when I say to myself, or say to your child, I want you to be happy? What does that mean? Because a lot of people say it. I want to be happier. I want my kids to be happy, but they don't know what that translates into. And I think our children, of course, don't. If we don't know what it means, our kids certainly don't know what it means. So we're telling them that we're trying to convey this impression that we want them to have a life that is generally positive, that makes them fulfilled, gives them purpose, gives them meaning, that sort of thing. And we use this term happy to kind of encapsulate a lot of things that we want for our children. But I want to be able to define what happiness is, and actually more importantly, what happiness isn't. So let me start off by telling you what happiness is not. Happiness is not an emotion. It's not a feeling. And that might sound strange to some of you because, of course, we use the phrase, oh, I'm feeling happy today, or I don't want to be sad anymore. I want to be happy. We use the term happy to describe how we feel, when actually a more accurate term would be something like joy, or we feel engaged, we feel excited, we feel energized. But actually, happiness isn't a feeling. Happiness is a state of being. So when I use the term happiness, I mean it like how Aristotle, way back in the ancient Greek times, meant it when he wrote about happiness. And certainly the way Thomas Jefferson meant the word happiness when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he talked about our pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What did Thomas Jefferson mean? Did he mean that we should all go around making ourselves joyful and feel positive emotion all the time? That's not at all what he meant, and because that's not what happiness is. Instead, happiness is a very complicated construct. It's actually a lot of things. It could be as many as 100 different things that make up happiness. It really kind of boils down to life satisfaction or contentment. Okay. We tend to think of happiness as something a little bit more exuberant and jubilant, like joy and excitement, but that's not what happiness is. Happiness is just a very steady state level of life satisfaction and contentment. And so when we are unhappy, that means that we are in some way, shape, or form dissatisfied or discontented. And so what we want to do today is start talking about how to turn things around and get off of the path that's leading you towards unhappiness and help you find the path that's going to lead you towards happiness. Okay. And that means being satisfied with your life, being satisfied with generally how things are going, and certainly feeling content. So it's not about positive emotion, although having positive emotion is a component of happiness. It's not completely divorced from emotion, and positive emotion is one of the aspects of happiness, but it's not the main thing. And it certainly isn't the primary thing that psychologists look to increase when we deal with clients and patients. So what's fascinating is that, I'm a psychologist by training, a PhD in clinical psychology. And throughout the history of mental health delivery, service delivery, there's been a huge emphasis on finding out ways that we can help people who are struggling. So there's been research for decades and decades about when people are depressed, let's understand depression, let's understand anxiety, let's understand bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and adjustment disorder and panic attacks. Let's focus on these pathological conditions or behaviors, and let's understand them and see if we can understand them more fully, and then, of course, teach people or help people not be that way anymore. So there's been all this focus on when things go wrong, okay? When you're depressed, when you're anxious, let's focus on that. And about 20 years ago, there was a substantial shift in the field of psychology, the science of behavior, studying behavior. And a new branch of psychology, as it were, was developed, and that's called the field of positive psychology. And what they realize is that, 90% of the time, statistically, this is the case, 90% of the time, most people are doing okay. They're not depressed. They're not anxious. They may have stress and they may have normal life experiences, but they're not clinically depressed. They're not struggling in any way. They're doing okay. And even a certain percentage of them are actually excelling. They're doing really well. So what the field of positive psychology decided to do was they wanted to look at the people who are doing well and the people who are even, really doing very well and study them. What are they doing right? So that we can learn the behaviors that they're doing and then perhaps teach them to everybody else, even people who are struggling with what we call pathology or depression, anxiety, that sort of stuff. Let's see if we can, kind of very discreetly figure out what people are who are really exceeding and excelling. What are they doing? And is it learnable? And can we teach it to other people? So for sure, over time, we have found that there are some very key things that happier people do and that less happy people don't do, either at all or as much. And it makes a huge difference. So the two pieces of information I want to tell you, this might help give you some reason to think about how you can inject more sense of happiness, contentment, life satisfaction in your life. And the first is that happier people live longer than less happy people. And by about 2.5 years. That's a long time. Like if you knew you could add 2.5 years onto your lifespan just by learning how to be happier, that might, perk your ears might perk up a little bit there and think, oh, I want to learn more about that. But that's what the data shows. So think about all when we hear about news headlines about all the things that are killers, depression, how depression actually decreases longevity, smoking, heart disease, not exercising, obesity, all those things, diabetes, decrease your lifespan. Here we have something that we know can actually increase your lifespan. That's fascinating. A strong correlation between depression and sleep. Well, absolutely. 2.5 years to your life by being happy. Don't forget that it's 6 months. It makes a difference. I don't know definitely depression is related to sleep because sleep disturbance is associated with depression. Okay. So either insomnia, not sleeping enough, or sleeping too much. So for sure, there's a strong correlation between depression and sleep. Depression and low-level vitamin D. I think there's a lot of research that's just now coming out about the relationship between depression and vitamin D. And of course, with the seasonal affective disorder, that's been a kind of a place where people wondered if there was a relationship, but for sure. But definitely sleep and depression, absolutely. But again, we're focusing on the depression. Let's see if we can focus on happiness. And that's what this positive psychology movement's about is let's see what, can we teach people how to be happier? And is this a learnable skill? And you know what? It is a learnable skill. We can teach people how to be happier. Isn't that fascinating? I think that's great. So the other piece of information, in addition to the fact that being happier actually adds years to your life, it actually makes you more powerful and more effective in your profession. So they did a research study. They looked at surgeons. And it was surgeons who specifically, I think they were radiologists. They had to diagnose, it was either liver cancer or kidney cancer. I can't remember which one, so I apologize. And they found that happier doctors were more accurate with diagnosing cancer in patients. Think about that. Happier doctors were more accurate in diagnosing cancer than unhappy doctors. So happiness is not just an emotion. It's not just something frivolous. It translates into real life drama. You're living longer and you're performing better at your job when you are happier. Okay. This is not a small matter. It's a very big deal. And so I really want to make sure that you get this message that if you feel less happy, if you lack contentment, if you're not satisfied with your life in general, you don't have to be out and out depressed. You don't have to have an anxiety disorder, but if you're just not happy in the satisfaction contentment realm, a definition of happy, there are ways that you can learn to be happier. And I would urge you to learn them because it's going to translate into not only perhaps increased longevity with a large group of people, not necessarily one person, but certainly you're going to do better in your chosen profession. All the things that you do in your life, you're going to do them better when you're happier, when you're more content, when you're more satisfied in your life. So please make sure that this is something that you really consider doing and pursuing because it makes a difference. Okay. So happiness is not just a frivolous thing. It really translates into some meaningful stuff here. Okay. So let's see here. They just recently started studying happiness over the past 20 years or so. And that may sound like a long time, but with science takes a long time to really start getting some results. So if there's this much to know about happiness, we probably at this point only know about this much. And part of that's, like I said, because the history of mental health, the mental health profession, all professions, not just psychologists, has really been focusing on the negative when things go wrong. It's just up until recently that we started thinking, let's focus when things are going right. What are those factors? What are those characteristics that happy people have or well-adjusted, thriving people have? Can we isolate what they are and can we teach them? And sure enough, we can. So they all fall, well, there's three kind of categories of kind of characteristics, components of happiness, life satisfaction, and contentment. And they include, each one of these components has a huge number of individual components and characteristics that add into it too. So it's not even just these three things. And it includes things like optimism and pessimism. And if you think about it, that makes sense. You may not be shocked to know that optimistic people are happier. And I mean, that should kind of make sense to you. And pessimistic people tend to be less happy. Again, it's not really rocket science. But what you may not know is that how optimistic and how pessimistic you are is actually genetic. This is fascinating. About 50% of people are pretty much born with a tendency to be optimistic, and about 50% of people are born with a tendency to be pessimistic. So you really are born with a tendency to skew towards one versus the other side. And optimism and pessimism, believe it, as you might imagine, also exists along a continuum. You're not either optimistic or pessimistic. You have degrees of optimism and pessimism. Science of Happiness is happy for no reason. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. And actually, there's a book called Authentic Happiness. There's also a book called Flourish, which both of them were written by Martin Seligman, who's kind of the granddaddy of positive psychology. And I studied under him for about 6 months. Unbelievable experience. He's fabulous. So for sure, definitely pick up those books if you're interested in reading about it. And I would probably, if you had to choose between the two, go with Flourish. It's the newer one and it's more updated with the more recent research. But thank you, Maria, for suggesting that book too. Optimism and pessimism, you're born with a tendency more towards one versus the other. The good news is, though, if you are naturally pessimistic, you can learn how to think more optimistically. So you can learn how to be a happier thinker. There's strategies that you can learn to override the pessimism. The thing that you'll need to know is that your default mode is probably always going to be to skew towards the pessimistic, the less positive. And so you have to be aware of that. Self-awareness is always key to change. That's the first step, is you have to be aware that there's a problem. And so once you know that you kind of geared more towards pessimism, then you have to be very deliberate about teaching yourself how to think more optimistically. And you can do that. Okay. I teach people how to do this all the time. I don't necessarily label it in those ways, but it's very, very doable. And it's not necessarily a hard thing to do either. It's just becoming aware and learning new thought techniques. So optimism and pessimism certainly is a component of happiness. Also, what they call the concept of flow. Okay. So the idea of flow is that each of us has a series of strengths and, of course, weaknesses. Happier people tend to operate in their areas of strength far more than in their areas of weakness. Okay. So happier people just naturally gravitate towards activities that call on their strengths more often than not, or they make a deliberate choice to do activities that call on their strengths, regardless of how they get there. Happier people work in activities that call on their strengths, what is naturally strong about them. Okay. And there's actually ways that you can evaluate what your strengths are. And in fact, if you're interested, the website that you can go to where you can take a test, it's actually very extensive. It's 200 multiple choice questions. It takes 15 or 20 minutes, and you have to really kind of think about each one. It's Authentic Happiness, all one word, AuthenticHappiness.org. And there's something called the Values in Action Signature Strength Survey. Thank you, Maria. And if you take that, you just log into the website. I'm not affiliated with it at all. And it's free. You just log in for free, take this test, and that test will give you your top 5 signature strengths. And I oftentimes have my clients do that. Actually, it's a kind of a quick way for me to learn about my clients when I first start working with them. Really, really powerful stuff, because what you want to do to be happier is make sure that most of the time, not all the time, you can't be unrealistic about this, but most of your time you want to be spending in activities that call on what is uniquely strong about you, okay, on where your strengths are. That's what happier people tend to do. And, sometimes that's easier said than done, especially if you find that most of what you're doing isn't where your strengths are. So you have to then start moving in this other direction to do things that do call on your strengths, right? So so when you are operating in activities or tasks that call on a strength of yours, some sort of inner innate strength that you have, sometimes you get into a state called flow. Now, if you are an exerciser at all, if you like jogging, or even if you've heard of people who like jogging and running, you don't have to be an exerciser yourself. You may have heard of the term the runner's high, okay, or the exerciser's high. And that refers to a state, and I have run off and on throughout my life, and there's been 2 times when I've actually experienced this myself, and it's shocking when it happens. It's when, I apologize actually for that background noise. That's my voicemail is going off for some reason. But what you do is, if you, as a business owner, if you know the strengths of your employees, you can assign them jobs that'll make them more happy and more satisfied. And that makes the business run better. Absolutely. So important. Oh, Marie, you've done the signature strengths, the VIA. Very good. Highly recommend it. I mean, it's free too. You can't, there's no reason not to. So anyway, when you're in the runner's high, you feel like I've never done drugs, so I've never been high. I've never even held a cigarette in my fingers, which puts me like in 5% of the population, the US population. So I know that sounds weird to people, but I've never been high. So I assume that when you're experiencing this, it's a state of euphoria. There's no other way to describe it. So when you're in this runner's high, first of all, I felt like I could run forever. I felt like I could just run for hours and hours and hours and never get tired. And because you feel like you're on top of the world and like you can conquer anything. It's a really incredible feeling. And so they call it the runner's high because when you're exercising, it's a little bit easier to induce that feeling than doing other things. However, you can have a similar sensation to that doing other types of activities, and that's called flow. So to be in the flow, all right, is the phrase that they use. And there's a very famous researcher. His name is Michael Csikszentmihalyi. What a name. I think he's Ukrainian or Russian. Anyway, he really studied this concept of flow and being in the flow. And he found that when people are engaged in activities that call on their unique strengths, they are much more likely to be in the sense of flow. And when you're in flow, it's like this runner's high. You feel like you are so merged with your activity that there's almost no difference between you and the activity that you're doing. So sometimes I can get like this too when I'm doing a jigsaw puzzle. I love to do jigsaw puzzles, and I don't do them nearly as much as I used to or nearly as much as I want to, but I love to do them. But I can get so immersed in doing a jigsaw puzzle, I lose track of time. I may even forget to eat because I'm just so immersed in this activity, just needing to get the pieces together and wanting to make this happen and get this one section done before I do something else. And that sense of losing yourself in an activity is what's considered flow. That's what that means to be in the flow. So what we found is that people who are happier tend to be in flow activities a lot more often than people who are less happy. Hi, Elvin, 9449. Good to see you. And so what they wonder, Maria, you said exercise releases the endorphins. And so what they're wondering is we can do in other flow related activities. And are there endorphins that are being released? We don't know if that's the case, but that certainly is one of the hypotheses that happens. So you want to be you want to be mindful of when you do activities. Are there certain things that you're doing where you're so immersed in the activity that you lose track of time? It just feels like such a part of who you are. Now, here's the caveat. This is not surfing the internet, okay, or looking at your phone or watching television. Activities like that where you zone out are actually the exact opposite of flow activities, okay? Flow activities engage your mind at some level, either the creative part of your mind or the intellectual part of your mind or both. It is an engaging process. And when you're in a flow activity, you don't even necessarily have a sense of being happy or joyful or even satisfied. And in fact, sometimes a flow related activity can make you feel frustrated, but you just you're so oriented towards doing this thing. You can't let go of it. But so think of someone who, well, actually like with my jigsaw puzzle, occasionally, if you've ever put together jigsaw puzzles, you might know that there are times when you're just trying to put some pieces together and they look like they should go together because the colors match and it looks like the shapes should match, but they just don't. And you kind of get to this point where you're like, you don't make any progress and it gets very frustrating. But you can't leave because it's like you just have to get this done, and not in a compulsive way, but it's just part of who you are, and this is just what you do. And so finally then you put one piece into another piece, and then that kind of opens up a whole world, and all these other pieces fall into place relatively easily. That's an example of being in a flow-related activity in a time when when I am feeling frustrated, but I don't want to quit. It's not like the type of frustration that makes you want to quit or makes you want to avoid the activity. It actually makes you want to, it increases your focus. You want to do more with it, right? So that's what a flow-related activity is. Internet stuff, your phone, tablet, television, none of that. That's the exact opposite of flow activities. Okay. So you want to actually avoid those. And that's going to get to the one thing that's the surefire way to path to unhappiness that I'll get to in a couple minutes. Engrossed in the zone for sure, Maria. Yeah. Thank you. So another big component of happiness is finding a sense of purpose or finding a sense of meaning. Okay. Having a portion of your life that you're, again, engaged in activities that give you a sense of meaning, that give you a sense of focus, and that give you a sense that you're contributing to something that's meaningful and larger than you, okay, that's beyond you. That's a very significant component of life satisfaction, contentment, and of course, happiness. So all of these things that I've talked about today have one thing in common, okay? And it's this one thing that if you do this, it will derail you from being happy. Okay. And this is the one thing that is a surefire path to unhappiness if you do this. So I want you to stop doing this because, by the way, we all do this to some degree. You have to stop giving away your attention to things that don't matter. You have to stop giving away your attention to things that do not matter. The more you give up your attention, the power that you have in your focus, your ability to focus, the more that you allow external things to grab your attention and to hold your attention where you're not intentionally making the choice to pay attention to it, you're just allowing something out there to grab your attention. The more you do that, the less happy you will be. Okay. You have to control where you put your attention. It has to be towards things that are oriented towards your strengths, your personal strengths, towards things that are more positive, and things that are purposeful and meaningful. So what does this mean? Quite frankly, it means that you have to stop watching all reality television. I mean, that's like the most basic place that you can start. And even feel-good shows like American Idol and America's Got Talent, all those shows where you can feel uplifted for a moment. The problem is that show is grabbing your attention. It is doing whatever it needs to do to make sure that you're paying attention to it instead of something else. It's all about managing distractions. And you might think, well, what's the big deal? I need to unwind. I need to zone out. At times, and I would agree with you. Yes, you do at times need to unwind, and there is a proper time to zone out. That's really very, very valuable. But most people who watch reality shows, they don't just watch one. It's not like 1 hour a week or even 1 hour a day they're spending in somebody else's life or multiple other people's lives. It's usually several hours out of a week that they're spending in somebody else's life. Who cares what Kim and Kanye are doing? But if you are really up to date on what those two are doing, but you feel like you don't have time for more important priorities in your life, then there's a problem, okay? So it's not a matter of, if I had to tell you bluntly, I'd say just get rid of all of that reality stuff. First of all, it's not real. Their mission is to grab your attention and to keep your attention. They're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. So if you start critically looking at some of these reality programs that you're watching, they're all negative. They're all built around conflict and tension. All of them, because that's what gets your attention, doesn't it? Those shows kind of cut to the most base parts of human nature, this like perverse desire to see people angry at each other. What's wrong with us that we find that to be entertainment? And then the other problem is that these reality programs give us a sense of entitlement about passing judgment on the choices that other people are making in their lives. So you may be sitting and watching some sort of reality program and you may think, oh, so-and-so shouldn't be doing that with so-and-so. That's not right. who knows what's really happening? You're being presented with some imaginary thing on a screen, and you're developing this whole fantasy about what's actually happening behind the camera. You have absolutely no idea, and yet you feel entitled to be able to pass judgment on that because it's in front of your screen. Meanwhile, your life is moving forward, and you're not steering it. You're allowing this external thing to grab your attention and to hold your attention, but it's not serving your highest and best purpose, is it? You may think, well, I'm zoning out. Okay, I need to, yeah, like Wipeout. Yeah, Wipeout. I never watched Wipeout. That was my kids and my family who watched that. But that's actually but that is a good example. So Wipeout, people would laugh at the people who were falling and like hurting themselves. Tell me, you can't tell me they didn't get hurt. I mean, you can't convince me they didn't get hurt. That's like, is that serving your best and highest purpose to be watching stuff like that? Probably the answer is no. So you might want to pull away from things like that. And you may think there might be a party who says, well, I'm not going to give up The Bachelor. I'm not going to give up watching this. I'm not going to give up watching that. Okay, that's fine. But understand what you're really giving up by choosing to pay attention to those things. There's other parts of your life that are not getting a lot of attention because you're paying enough attention to these distractions. And when you look at the components, the characteristics of what makes people happy, it is the level of engagement with their actual life. It has absolutely nothing to do with how much you know about pop culture. I mean, nothing to do with how much you know about pop culture. You may be scared that it might come across to other people like you're out of touch, or like, because you don't know, who is on The Bachelor or who the top 4 finalists are on American Idol. And you may want to feel like you're in with some group, or that you know what everybody else is talking about. And if that's the case, I want you to really challenge yourself. Why are you worried about that? Okay. Why are you worried about that? Is that helping you have a better life? Now, if the answer is yes, if you're in the entertainment industry, then maybe, okay, I could see the argument that you might need to pay attention to what Kim and Kanye are doing every week. But most of us are not in the entertainment industry. And so it probably doesn't make sense for us to spend a whole lot of time and attention there, especially when we know for a fact there are certain things that we can do that will make us happier in the long run, and we're not doing them, okay? So the surefire path to happiness is to give away your attention, to give it away to random things that happen to grab your attention in your world, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on television, whether it's on your phone, or whether it's gossip. This is the other thing. It might not necessarily be related to electronic media. It could be that you associate with people who are talking about other people a lot. And it may not even be necessarily mean-spirited, but again, is that serving your best and highest purpose? Is it serving that other person's best and highest purpose? Are you happier? You may feel a sense of perverse justification, and someone else is really suffering, and because they're suffering, I can feel better. That's not happiness. And you don't want that. You really don't. You may, in the moment, it may make you feel powerful, and it may make you feel like you're better than somebody else, but you're not happier. And you're really not better off, okay? So I want you to really pay attention to where you're putting your attention. Where are you putting your energy, your focus? What are you allowing into your mind? What are you allowing to influence you? And then how are you using that information to choose the tasks and activities that you're going to do on a daily basis? And are they tasks and activities that are calling on the best of who you are? Or are you just getting through the day? So this is a heavy duty topic. I don't like to talk about lighthearted things. So does faith have a role in happiness? Absolutely. I would argue that faith is the bedrock of happiness, that if you don't have faith in God, that there is a benevolent God out there who loves you and who wants the best for you, and you can have hope in, I won't say it's impossible to find earthly happiness. It certainly is possible to find earthly happiness in that way. But true happiness, ultimate happiness, spiritual happiness is found in faith in God. Gratitude is actually considered, Maria just wrote that gratitude is also key to happiness. Gratitude is what they call actually one of the foundational components of happiness. So you actually can't be happy unless you have a lot of gratitude first. It's kind of it's a bedrock sort of emotion or experience to be grateful. And in fact, when I did the Authentic Happiness class several years ago, it's one of the very first tasks that people had. So I'll give this to you all if you want to have an assignment to work on that will help increase your happiness pretty darn quickly. And that is to keep a gratitude journal. So I guess Oprah made this popular. I don't know. It could even be like 20 years ago. I was a long time ago when Oprah first started talking about having a gratitude journal. But I want you to take it one step farther. So what I would recommend, and actually this was the assignment that the students had in the class, is to keep a gratitude journal. So every night, write down 3 to 5 things that you were grateful for that day, that happened that day. Okay. So make sure you go to bed at night after having written down specifically what were 3 to 5 things that you were grateful for. And then in addition to that, the piece that I added for my clients is, hold on, let me get you some, is to write why you're happy about that, why you're grateful for that. So don't just say that, I'm grateful for this, but also indicate why you're grateful. Oh. Okay, you're calling in and I can't, for some reason, figure out how to get you. Oh, there you go. Jacob?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear? Oh, I don't see you.
Oh, well, I don't know what's the problem, but...
Oh, you don't have to. Do you have a question or a comment about happiness?
No, just keep talking. If I have any question, I'll ask it.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, welcome, Jacob. It's glad to see you.
Thank you.
Great. See ya. All right. Oh, well, it says kick. I'm not kicking you out, Jacob, so don't feel offended. Okay. I hate to see make people, that's a terrible thing to say that you're kicking somebody out. I am absolutely not kicking you out. So don't feel like you've been banished, Jacob. But if there are any questions or if you have your secret to happiness, I would love to know what it was. So the things that I talked about today, by the way, are backed up in about 2 decades of research. I started the show by telling you that the history of mental health, the profession, is that we have studied when things go wrong, about when people go off track, when there's a pathological problem that's happening. And that's been very valuable. We've really advanced our knowledge substantially in mental health problems. We know a lot more about depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia, and bipolar, and all these really important things that we need to know more about. However, oh, thank you. You're sweet, Jacob. He just said it's the best talk on Blab. I appreciate the kind words. Thank you. But about 20 years ago, we shifted focus, and there was a group of researchers headed by Martin Seligman, who wrote the book that I referenced a couple minutes ago called Flourish, as well as Authentic Happiness. And that's the website. The website is AuthenticHappiness.org, and it's based on the book that Seligman wrote. And what they decided, they realized, about 90% of the time, most people are actually doing kind of okay. They're hanging in there. And a couple of those people are actually thriving. Like there's a lot of people who are really doing well, not just hanging in there. So let's study the people who are doing well. What do they do differently? And can we isolate what those behaviors are? And can we teach them to other people? And we found, yes, we can isolate what they do, and we can teach them to other people, and we can actually increase the amount of happiness and positive emotion that one person experiences. So it's very, very exciting. You think social media is contributing to unhappiness. I could not agree with you more. People are comparing their lives to others on social media, and people don't always post the truth on their social media posts. That's what Leah said. And I agree 200%, Leah. And I've actually found that I have stopped hanging out on Facebook quite as much because if anything, it just, it brings you down. I mean, there's always negativity. There's always negative headlines. And why? Because people gravitate towards those. We tend to feel a very perverse sense of power when we know someone else is suffering. That's a human nature tendency. It's disgusting, but it's true. And that's why these negative headlines tend to grab us. It's like, well, at least we're not in that circumstance, so we can feel better about ourselves. And, a little bit of that makes sense. Like you don't want to think that you're really having a catastrophic day when all you really did was stub your toe, and meanwhile there's people starving on the other side of the earth. But it's true about your country. So too many negative headlines. I think it's a worldwide thing, Jacob. Yeah. And it's too many negative headlines because they get attention. Okay. This is why you have to be not just you, Jacob, but everybody has to be so careful about where you put your attention. What are you allowing to grab and hold your attention? And make sure that it's things that actually serve your highest and best purpose. Don't just willy-nilly give away your attention. That's you're giving away your power. You're giving away your happiness. Don't do that anymore. When you judge others, one finger's pointing at you and four at them and four back at you, like this. Exactly right. So it is a natural thing, though, that most people, are the negative things grab our attention. You just have to be very aware of it. Similar, like how I was talking about pessimistic people, about how some people who are just born pessimistic, and that's the truth, where you have a genetic tendency to be either pessimistic or optimistic. You have to be very aware that your default mode is going to be always be pessimistic, and you have to override that with more optimistic type thinking. Leah, your happiness factor skyrocketed when you stopped watching the news. Amen. You've not watched the news since August. Life is better. I stopped watching morning television, the morning news in like 2008, sometime back then. I think it was like the springtime of 2008. And I grew up watching the Today Show, Bryant and Jane, I grew up watching them every single morning. And what I realized is, especially because I had done the authentic happiness training, I had really immersed myself in this research, understanding what happiness is, how we can be more content, how we can have more life satisfaction. And guess what? When you expose yourself to all that negativity, that's counterproductive to leading a really great, happy lifestyle. So absolutely get rid of the news. Stop watching the news. Yeah. Okay. So Jacob's point is excellent, which is you can stop watching the news, but people are going to talk about it. Yes, it's true. So what you can do is rise above it, refuse to participate in the conversation. And not in a dismissive or rude way, but the way you handle that is you can just kind of nod and say, oh, that's interesting. Or, oh, I never really thought about that way. Just say very neutral sort of things back. And that's a way that it doesn't make you seem like you're a snob, that you don't want to participate in a conversation, but also you don't get pulled into all that negativity. But it is hard. I mean, the truth of the matter is that leading a life where you have a high contentment factor is hard. You have to make tough decisions, sometimes on a daily basis. And remember, this is not an all or nothing thing. The research is clear about this because, life is going to happen. Life is unfair. We're going to have negative things happen to us. That's just life. And we're going to have moments where we get sucked into conversations where people are being negative, and there's just not a lot that you can do about that if you're stuck there, right? So this is not a matter of being all or nothing, It is a matter, though, of making sure that most of the time, maybe 70 or 80% of the time, you really are being positive, or you're trying to stay above the fray, okay? Most of the time. I think it's kind of impossible to do it all of the time and, have an engaged lifestyle because, people are not everyone's going to want to be as optimistic as you are. So, and you have to deal with other people at a certain point. So it's going to be nearly impossible to be this way 100% of the time. You have a colleague who's moving to Australia as a way of running away from the bad news in Israel. Oh, you know what? And this is not being negative. This is just the truth. He's going to find bad news in Australia too, because it's everywhere. It's a human condition. And there's actually a name for it, a term for it. And it's a big, long German word that refers to the human tendency to be attracted to the negative. And what the heck? And I'm blank. I think it starts with an S, and it's a very big, long German word. But anyway, it is a natural human tendency to be pulled to the negative. And that is where faith becomes very important, because we are only human. Like we can't, in many ways that this is where our tendency is always going to be to screw it up. And so, you have to rely on faith to pull you out of that at times. Okay. We are just about out of time. Look at that. Thank you so much. What wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for all of your questions and your conversation, Jacob. Thank you for taking a seat on Blab. I'm so excited that you did that with me, because that's fun. I think you're new to Blab too. So I hope that you'll watch my show. It's going to be on next Monday again at 2 p.m. Eastern. You're in Israel. So I have absolutely no idea what time it is in Israel. Monday, it's 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll bet you're 7 or 8 hours ahead. You're probably like 8 hours ahead of like New York time. So that would be, so it's 2100 hours is Monday, next Monday. Okay, Cool. But if you want to, you can get on my email list. And I don't sound like a ton of emails, but if you go to the website, thefreedomprescription.com, actually my assistant Maria just put it there in the chat box. If you click on that and you give me your email address, I send out reminders for the show. So you can know when my next show is and you can watch. And I'd love to have you back and hear your great, great input. And I wish your friend good luck in Australia. I hope he finds what he's looking for. I assume it's a he. I don't know. Because it's, but negativity really is everywhere. Maybe it is worse in Israel. It could be. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your tips and what's made you happy in the past and what your perspective is on this. So I look forward to seeing you next time on the Dr. Anita Show. Bye. Take care, everyone.